Alrighty. Hello, everybody in chat. An uncommon number of viewers, in fact, and welcome to the Washington Post's weekly video game news show. That still doesn't really have a proper title yet, but we are going to have one next week. That is definitely a thing that will finally happen. I am a reporter at the Washington Post. My name is Nathan Grayson, and I am joined by two guests this week to talk about recent Twitch music news. So my guests are Harris Heller, say hello,
What's up, guys?
and Mike the Bard.
Hello.
And yeah, so let's see. Harris, you made a tool called Stream Beats, which is basically copyright-free music that streamers can use without fear of being DMCA'd, or I guess now without fear of being subjected to Twitch's new proprietary system. And then Mike, you are a musician and streamer and someone who I imagine probably has a fairly vested interest in all of this simply by virtue of what you do for a living.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And so to begin, I think I just want to like get an impression from both of you of like what you think the ramifications of this week's, basically to sum up, Twitch made a deal with the NMPA, which is the National Music Publishers Association, to sort of, I think, create some semblance of peace between Twitch and the music industry. Previously, Twitch was being hit fairly regularly with DMCA takedown notices for content being made by streamers involving licensed music. That was obviously starting to wear on streamers. It was just generally a very bad state of affairs. Twitch made this deal such that now they sort of can play middleman there. And so instead of streamers getting hit with DMCAs and potentially losing their channels, now at least like they get warnings from Twitch and can, sort of act in a more deliberate fashion rather than panicking and deleting everything that they've ever made. More or less. So I guess to begin, yeah. So to begin, like, what is your sort of read on the situation broadly? Like, do you feel like this is something that benefits streamers in any real notable way, or is this mainly Twitch acting in their own interests?
Oh, and this is not. I've been a fair enough critic of Twitch as of recently. I try to be critical of everyone, but this is. I say this not being critical of Twitch here. This is 100% Twitch covering their own butts, trying to make sure they maintain safe harbor status. Anytime a company or a platform makes a big move like this, it's rarely for the interest of the creators. It's for the interest of the platform, which is in the interest of the creators. So it's not a bad thing all around, but it's to protect their safe harbor status. I think we're actually going to see more notices going towards streamers with this change.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't originally the hype around sort of the teaser announcement that came out about it, people thought, oh, we're going to be able to play whatever we want on stream again, do cover songs, whatever, safely. It has nothing to do with that. It really doesn't. This is almost just like another layer before the DMCA, essentially. And the way that I read it was that it's only for participating entities. So they have to sort of opt into using Twitch's new system that they're talking about, and sort of agree to that in order to, quote unquote, protect the streamers more, if you will. But the DMCA is a law that exists, and it's not going away probably anytime soon. And basically, that's it. It's just a new layer of if companies want to report their audio being used without permission on Twitch, they can opt into this new system, and people can receive warnings rather than punitive or any sort of punishment, if you will. So
I think people are going to take it the wrong way and going to think I can just get away with it without warnings now.
Right.
But as someone like before I was a gaming content creator, I was a music content creator, and I promise you, the music industry is not lenient. It just, the difference is before it was an all or nothing. You either got nothing in the mail or you got a DMCA strike in the mail. And this relationship has made a middle gray area, which is here's a warning. I would be surprised if anyone got more than one warning. But the fact that there is a middle that's not 100% your channel is gone, I think is going to allow Twitch to send out more. And when we talked about stream beats, anytime there is any email about copyright scare, it's free advertising for stream beats. So I think this is a win-win all around. In my book, this is more warning for people who are playing the wrong music, being told, "Hey, stop doing that. Next time you will get a DMCA strike." And then and it's going to push more people towards actually safe music, because this doesn't change what you can play on stream.
Right. Well, yeah. So, I mean, for one, like just to kind of give an idea of what is and isn't safe to, people who may not be music creators who are watching. Like, for example, Mike, if you were to do like a live cover on stream of a song that was like fairly close to the original, how much danger do you think that you would be in?
Based on not the law, but on previous what has happened on Twitch, I don't know personally of anyone that has been dinged for playing a cover song by the original rights holders. But the law is there, and that means that you are putting yourself at risk 100% playing cover songs. Or again, if we talk about popular music, playing popular music in the background, same thing, really. They're two different situations, but there's laws against both of them. Rights holders with music have rights, and in order to legally perform, if you will, a cover of a song on Twitch, you should have the express written permission or proper licenses through a third party or however you obtain them to cover a song, and that includes sync rights and all sorts of different rights that you're going to require. It can be costly. It can be hard to get a hold of all the proper rights holders to do that. The way I look at playing a cover on Twitch, a lot of people play covers in bars, for example. I kind of compare the two. Most times people don't obtain licenses to play covers in bars. And the bar, even though where I live, the law says the bar is required to obtain those licenses, a lot of times they don't. And bands and musicians play covers. Same thing on Twitch. I see people playing covers all the time. And they, in my opinion, they are risking their channel and potentially their livelihood by playing covers without the proper licenses. And it's risky. Sometimes the risk pays off for people. You might get more exposure or subs or whatnot through playing popular music. But I'm not a lawyer. It's not legal advice, but it is, I think, legally dangerous to your brand and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Somebody in let's see, I think it was Redfish Games in chat just asked basically like what happens, and I'm not sure if we know this, but what happens if a music publisher or anybody else in the music industry does not opt in to Twitch's program and instead like still wants to, in some other way claim their music? I'd assume it's just still DMCAs. Like this doesn't eliminate DMCAs.
Nothing changes. I mean, even if a company does opt in, they can still issue a DMCA strike. This isn't removing the rights of the music industry. This is just giving them a lesser option if they feel like giving a warning, which is again rare for the music industry. But it just gives them another option. But they can absolutely still issue the same DMCA strikes.
Yeah,
we haven't seen yet that I know of a musician being sued, which is, I mean, DMCA exists as a way for the music industry rights holders to uphold their rights. But I think something that we haven't seen really, because I don't know whether it's just bad press or the fact you're probably not going to get a lot of money. You wouldn't get a lot of money from me if you were going to be suing me for something like that. But like it might not be worth it PR wise or financially for some of these rights holders to go after someone in court. But I believe, depending on where they live and where the laws are and how they apply, they have the right to sue. And, that would be devastating for somebody, someone is just trying to eke out a living playing music on Twitch, for example. If they're not super big, if they took you to court, I mean, it's over, So again, I don't think we've seen that on Twitch yet, but it's always a possibility. And from the legal advice I've heard, don't put yourself in that position, because
the key word is yet.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. It could really happen. Absolutely. And we've seen Certain organizations go to, I think I'm Canadian, but I think the United States, the Congress or something, being brought before Congress to answer. I think that was with Amazon about some of the things that are happening with audio on Twitch, and maybe the platforms not paying enough attention according to the recording industry. So, pressures like that keep getting put on Twitch or Amazon by the government will also be ramping up these measures. And as Harris said, the safe harbor is huge. Like, it protects YouTube, it protects Twitch, because there's just so much information and so much content. They can't monitor it all the time. It's nearly impossible. So that's where safe harbor comes in. But if they lose safe harbor, they lose their business.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, like, everything about Twitch is predicated on that idea, right? Or at the very least and like, I think people don't think about this very much. Like, literally everything about Twitch is predicated on this idea that either people are giving implicit permission to Twitch streamers to use content that is copyrighted in video games, or there are other people who hold copyrighted content that they're not giving that implicit permission to use, in the case of like music and things like that. But I mean, that's all of Twitch. That's all of streaming, right? I mean, unless like you are somebody doing just chatting and like talking over, I mean, even then, vanishingly few things are not copyrighted. So, yeah. But I guess I was wondering, in the case of the music industry, why are they so prone to going after people in this way? What makes the music industry do that in a way that you don't necessarily see, like, for example, the video game industry do?
A couple of reasons. I mean, anything they need to do is for the effort of making money. So, for example, if you take a live stream, someone's streaming a big game right now, Apex Legends. Apex Legends blew up because of streamers playing it. There is monetary value in it being broadcast. Whereas generally music is used more as like a radio tool, like a background tool, and very rarely does someone ask, hey, what song's being played right now? I'm going to go look it up, and I'm going to play it 100 times and actually make the record, the musician, the rights holder, any money. So for the gaming industry, there's a win there. There's a profit there. For the music industry, they're basically just being used for free. Which is why YouTube struck a deal when they went through this 10 years ago, because there was money that could be shifted over to those rights holders. They created the whole content ID system saying, hey, if your music is used, you can just take all the revenue and the YouTuber doesn't get any of it. That's not an option here on Twitch, because generally in a YouTube video, one song is played and all the ad revenue can be I mean, I've got YouTube videos that have made a couple $1,000s on a single video. And if I used a song, that could all go to a single rights holder. On Twitch, I play music for 5 hours straight. What are they going to do? Split the 50 cents of ad revenue that I make on that stream? There's just nothing to be gained from the music industry by this industry. And so they just say, you know what? We don't want anything to do here. Let's just shut it all down. Anyone who illegally uses our stuff, shut it down.
Yeah. Another thing is, in regard to that, is licensing. So to answer why they do go after YouTubers or Twitch streamers or anybody making content, I think a big portion of the music industry makes money from licensing, which comes after the song is recorded. If you were a television show, and sometimes I see Twitch streams, or like a live television show almost. If your favorite television show is playing a popular song or any song, it's licensed. They've paid for the rights or negotiated some sort of deal, and that makes the rights holders money. And that's like, after a song is out, it gets played on radio, and there's a little bit of money that trickles in from that, but it's all licensing. It's all licensing money and fees. And if I'm running a Twitch stream and I play whatever music I want, there's no licensing money being collected from me at all. So that's another side of it. I believe that the recording industry is really propped up by this licensing after the music is already out. So that no money is coming into the recording industry through licensing if we're just playing music however we want. So of course they don't like that either, which, it's a business, and there's laws, and that's the way it is at the moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, another one of the things that I sort of, because I reported on this, in the kind of initial wake of Twitch getting hit by tons of DMCA's. And one person that I talked to in the music industry who like runs a, I think, fairly large independent record label, basically also pointed out that back when radio was kind of like taking off and becoming the de facto way that music got out there, the music industry, for a variety of reasons, like labels and artists, kind of got like shafted on those deals. And that has informed their approach to basically everything since, of like, you know, we're not going to let that happen again. We're not going to collect incredibly small amounts of money per play on our songs. Or at least the labels won't. I mean, you'll get Spotify, and it's like, well, that's what the artists are getting now. So that sucks.
Spotify is even worse, I think, for artists in that regard.
Mhm.
For some people, depending on the deal, but yeah, it continues. So it's a tricky situation.
Yeah. Well, on the kind of like live side of things, I mean, I think that one of the main entities that people cite is that like Facebook, for example, has a deal where their partners can play some licensed music. I mean,
Yeah.
I like see that come up a lot in terms of people saying, why isn't Twitch doing something like this? But then I see other people be like, oh, but also like Facebook is also very prone to going after people for playing licensed music. So like, is that deal even very good? Like, what is y'all's understanding of how things work on Facebook in this regard?
Well, Twitch hasn't done that because it's incredibly expensive.
Hmm.
But it is a weird, it's a weird tool, because I still get people. I've seen people get their streams shut down. When I read up as much as I could on the information about this deal, it was, hey, so a lot of music is safe, not all of it, and we're not going to tell you which one is and which one isn't. You just find out. And I mean, it's better than nothing. And it's really cool that they did that. I actually really applaud Facebook for going out and trying to make progress there. But it was, I think the cost doesn't really justify what the tool ends up being, because it is scary. Every song is a risk.
Yeah. I've always thought that a way going forward, expanding on what Facebook has already started to do, I think it'd be amazing if there was a portal. And I mean, this could be something that maybe the recording industry themselves could profit from. But you know, catalog. They already have a catalog of all their rights and music that they own the rights to. You know, put it out there for a monthly subscription fee or something. Obviously, there's a lot of complication, especially when there's so many different rights holders on one song. There could be 12 people that own partial rights, and you'd have to get everybody to say yes. And I understand. So it's a complicated idea, but just some way for, because content creation is not going away. It's ramping up. More and more people, the next generation coming through, they all know what content creation is, and it's a very attractive industry to want to get into if you're a creative person, and it is viable for some people to make a career out of it. So I believe there's going to be more than ever more content creators. This is just going to become more of a problem going forward, and I really feel that there needs to be some sort of a portal where if hey, I want to play this popular song in the background of my YouTube video, I just go there, paid $10 or $1 a month, whatever it is to host that song. So someone just has to create I feel like a database to allow content creation to happen in a more organic way that upholds the rights of right holders and so on.
It is really weird to me that no music industry has taken advantage. Like, content creation industry is not going to go away, and they need music. And if the music industry could just say, hey, we found a way for you to use our music and for us to make the proper royalties off of it, like, it'd be a win-win all around. I actually proposed something like a year ago when this first started happening. Yeah, you know how easy it would be for the music industry, the top major labels, to sign a deal with Spotify saying, hey, let's make a licensed subscription. So if you're a streamer, instead of paying $7 a month or however much Spotify is, you pay $25 a month, and then it tracks how many viewers you have or whatever, and it knows how many other people are listening to the music. You know, those tools have existed for a long time. Spotify can just check and see how many people you're broadcasting to and pay out the royalties properly. And a broadcasting license is 4 or 5 times the cost of a regular Spotify license, and then you can use music with no risk. And the music industry makes money. There are so many, like, I am benefiting so much that the music industry doesn't want to figure this out. I mean, I hope they don't do this. I
Sure,
hope they
yeah.
continue to stay behind because it's been great for me. But it's
Absolutely.
the solution is so simple, but it just
Yeah.
there's too many moving parts. The industry is too antiquated.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, is it also like, do you think it's a matter of just certain like entities and organizations not wanting to play nice with each other because they're like sort of competing? Or is it just that like, yeah, they have a particular way that they know of doing things and they don't want to budge from that because they're not willing to
No,
consider this, content creation like a valid means of using music?
my guess. Have you ever done? Let me give you an analogy. Have you ever done cable management on like a gaming setup or a streaming setup?
Oh yeah.
And
Well,
then you
I've tried
change
before, then I
and
gave
then you
up.
change a part and you got to change cables and then you change
Mhm.
monitors and you got to change cables, you change cameras, and like after a year it's just a rat's nest. And you think like, if I really wanted to fix this, I'd have to rip apart the entire thing and start from scratch. That's the music industry, except make it 100 years. And there are so many different rights holders, so many different entities, so many different companies. It's become so convoluted that the only fix would be to completely destroy the music industry and rebuild it from scratch. And I just don't think they want to do it.
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Like,
And
you know the phrase sync licenses. You know that
Mhm.
actually came from syncing music with silent films.
right.
That,
That's
and we're still using that term. Like,
yeah.
that's how old these things are, and they would have to redo the entire thing, and it's just not worth it to them.
Well, even DMCA was invented in the late 90s,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? Even in the 90s when it
Before
was
YouTube was a thing.
yeah,
A
Mhm.
it was
decade before
mostly
YouTube was a thing.
it was applied to CDs,
Yeah.
right? So that's what it was made for. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act was made around, people illegally ripping CDs and maybe using LimeWire or something back in the day. I don't even think LimeWire
Yeah.
LimeWire wasn't even around then.
Kazaa,
Yeah,
Oh,
Kazaa,
man.
exactly,
Classic.
right?
Napster. Oh yeah.
Virus.exe, but
I'm
yeah,
not that old.
yeah, well, I am, and
Yeah, I definitely am.
Yeah.
and I remember, but that's how old these laws are. Like DMCA is antiquated. It had nothing to do with content creators in mind because that wasn't a thing. It was not. It didn't exist. So they need to update those laws, DMCA laws. They need to update copyright. They need to update the music industry as a whole, and copyright, and just look at what the use case is now. Because there's going back to games and how it relates to this. I mostly stream GTA 5 roleplay. That's what I do most of the time, and I integrate my music into that. But there's people getting claims against not a horn sound, a siren sound that's in GTA because something happened where when Rockstar made that game, they acquired the licensing not only for the music in the game, but some of the sounds might have been made out of house, and they bought the rights for the game, but maybe there was a part of that license that expired where, if it's not, like, you can use it in your house, but if you're broadcasting with it, maybe that license isn't covered anymore. So there's more. There's like music, but then there's also music in games, and then there's also sounds in games, and
Mhm.
all of these laws that are antiquated, they don't really apply. They don't fit very well to what's going on in today's world in regards to music. Like, a lot of musicians don't tour. They live stream what they do. It's cheaper, especially when you're starting out. Maybe you can't afford a van to travel around with your equipment and make like barely any money from playing at bars and things like that. You switch on you get a nice setup in your room there, and you just go with your band or by yourself, just playing a guitar and getting your music out that way. Um, that is now what music is. You can make your own music. Harris makes music. You can make good quality music from your home, from your bedroom, and you could become a career musician, and you never have to leave your bedroom. So the laws and these situations we're facing now aren't they're antiquated, like Harris said. They're just outdated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think some people in chat are already talking about this, but yeah, there's also like you have like the very complicated use cases too, where like there is licensed music in a video game that someone's streaming, and so a lot of games now have like streamer modes, where the idea is that just you flip a switch, and then the licensed music will no longer show up. But sometimes it's like very weird. Like, I don't know if either of you saw like that clip from Life is Strange.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's just somebody like jamming out, like, playing air guitar, and there's just nothing in the background. And it's so unsettling.
And if you watch a television show or a movie, there's been some famous cases, I can't remember the exact ones, but where if you saw the movie in the theater, it had like some popular music, but then when it came to, home release or whatever, they didn't have the license didn't carry over, so they used just some generic MIDI, stuff, elevator sounding music, and it really doesn't fit the mood as well, and it kind of ruins the art that's been made in a lot of ways. So it's, even that is a big issue right now.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it makes it better. I don't know if you
That's
saw
true.
Metallica. I
I
don't
was
know if you
about
saw
to say, I was
Metallica
gonna bring
jamming out.
Metallica.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, to like wind chime
one of the
noises.
best
perfect moment.
content I've ever seen. I'm so
Oh my
glad
god, that was
happened.
incredible.
It was
But yeah, because people were
unintentionally hilarious. Yeah.
in chat, people were just bringing up when Metallica sued LimeWire. Which thing did they sue in like the
Napster, I think.
yeah Napster? Sorry, in the
That was the
90s.
first.
Yeah, and so like of course comes time for them to play BlizzCon, and once again they're
It was
like,
a classic.
Oh,
yeah, it's karmic
gold.
retribution, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, coming from the side of a content creator, but also a musician, I get it. I mean, if I make a song, like I should have some rights, I feel, around that. Money aside, I should get to decide if a piece of art uses my music
Mhm.
alongside it. If for some reason I don't, for whatever reason, I don't like the art, whoa, this doesn't represent me, or I really hate this. Like, I don't want to be my song to be affiliated with that. I feel I should have the right to that as a musician. But then I also understand the idea where people are like, well, I just want to put your song in the background of my Twitch stream while I'm playing, Apex or whatever. But it gets real sticky when it's like, well, yeah, but I don't want my content in your as part of your content because that's my choice. It should be my choice, and I just don't want you to use my song,
Mhm.
as part of
Yeah.
your art or your content. So
Well,
that's
there
where it
are
gets a little sticky.
opportunities for solutions. Just nobody's trying to find them.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. Yeah.
Well, yeah, actually, as part of the when I reported on this development earlier this week, I did like briefly talk to the president of the NMPA, and like a large portion of the press release surrounding this whole announcement was that it wasn't just like about the enforcement program for all of this. It was also about like future opportunities that this creates now that I guess probably there's less animosity between Twitch and the music industry. Um, and so yeah, like after, because also the NMPA like went after Twitch super hardcore over the summer, and you got to figure, that probably played a role in this deal happening because I would imagine Twitch wanted them off their back. But yeah, so David Israelite, who is the president of the NPA or NMPA, said that it does pave the way for Twitch to license music, but this wording is interesting to me. If it decides it wants to provide that benefit to its streamers.
That's the kicker.
Yeah, which to me sounds like ball is in your court, guys. And like if this doesn't happen, it is on you.
The ball being in Twitch's court is rarely a good outcome.
Right. Well, yeah, okay. So another thing that I think a lot of people bring up when it comes to this conversation is like, okay, if the ball is in Twitch's court, then why not just use Amazon Music in some way, shape, or form here?
Yeah.
They have this massive portion of their company theoretically dedicated to music. Why is there not interoperability there?
Well, because they'd still have to pay for the rights. Like just because they have a music service doesn't negate the obligation to actually pay for the royalties licenses. So that wouldn't change anything in terms of the cost. I really think that was a missed opportunity for Twitch because right now, let's be real, like Amazon Music is not winning against Apple Music and especially Spotify. But if Amazon Music was the solution to every live streamer's issue, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to run the numbers. I assume that they did, and they said like just the positive, the positives from bringing everyone over to Amazon Music does not outweigh the cost of the licenses. So I don't know what that would be, but it feels like there may have been an opportunity there to turn Amazon Music into a more prevalent platform because of this problem. I mean, every problem is an opportunity for someone else. And I think this could have been an opportunity for Twitch or for Amazon. And I don't know. I don't know what the conversations were like. I don't know what the numbers were.
They were like, well, on one hand, this could be an opportunity for us, but instead we want to give it to Harris Heller specifically.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
It's interesting because they, if we go back and look at Twitch Sings, which was a very deep conversation about licensing, and that's, you know, the reason why it shut down probably, you know, allegedly, is that, you know, licensing would have cost them a lot of money, a lot. And I don't think they were getting any, it wasn't a monetized platform at all, which we all felt they probably could have done. And a lot of us probably would have paid for a monthly subscription to Twitch Things to help pay for the licensing. It probably, but again, they would have ran the numbers and it probably didn't add up to the licensing costs at all.
Yeah, I try not to make assumptions about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually talked to some sources around the time that everything was heating up around DMCA's, and the impression I get was never able to fully pin this down. But what I heard from a few people is basically that there was a time period in like around 2015 when Twitch was sort of trying to play ball with the music industry, and then they sort of tabled those talks and just got on with their lives. And then they went back to the music industry when they started making Twitch Sings. And that was essentially like the poke the bear moment, because the music industry was like, oh, now you want to like work with us because you want to make a thing that's going to make you money. And so I think part of the reason that they decided to stop doing Twitch Sings is because they made some people mad by making it. And they're like, oh, this is probably not something we should do anymore.
Yeah, it's possible. Back to Amazon Music. It's interesting because they did do a little bit of a link between Twitch and Amazon Music. If you are a creator, if you're a musician yourself, you can link your Twitch account to your Amazon Music account. And when you stream on Twitch, you'll pop up, or you could pop up on Amazon Music's page. So I did this just to test it because I don't have a lot of music. I put one song on Spotify or Amazon Music rather, and just to test this link, and it does link your account, your two accounts. And if you go to my Amazon Music account, it does show that I'm live on Twitch right now. So it's interesting. It's like they started building a little link there, some bridges, but it's like they never fully pushed it, or there's never a lot of push. There's never a lot of advertising push, which is the thing.
It seems like there wasn't a lot of value there. They didn't quite develop it out to actually provide value to anyone either.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting though, because you would figure like that Twitch would be trying to build out these exact like smaller interstitial links between like what streamers do and what people can sort of like where streamers can otherwise find them. I mean, like similarly, it's surprising to me that there's not more like integrated like merchandise functionality on Twitch. Like there are all these streamers that are selling merch now and doing merch drops and stuff, and it just seems to me that you could easily build that into the Amazon store. And
they did actually.
Oh yeah.
If you're a Twitch streamer, you can there's merch by Amazon. I actually sold a couple shirts there. Again, it wasn't great deep integration, but it was there. It was 70% done, but it's not enough for people to use it. I really think there's a lot of balls being dropped over there.
Right. Well, yeah, and like that's interesting unto itself because somebody actually in chat, let's see, Shawnee G Vids was saying, do you think if Twitch was even a remotely profitable thing for Amazon, they would be more active trying to strike more deals with companies or labels? I mean, I think that to an extent, yeah, they probably would be. I think the other thing to recognize about Twitch that a lot of people don't really know is simply that Twitch is not profitable yet. And like they're pushing hard toward it. But I think what that has also meant in recent times is that they're trying to trim fat rather than build out a lot of things. And so like, for example, they have streamers like Dr. Lupo and Tim the Tatman asking them for at least the same amount of money they were making before, if not more. And Twitch is like, we can afford to lose these people. It's not going to damage us that much, and we can cut some money here. Similarly, if they're looking at like a music licensing deal, you got to figure they think, well, if we do this, people will be happy. But if we don't do this, it's not like we're going to lose that many people or really change much about our service. So it's an expenditure for functionally no gain, at least in the grander scheme of profitability.
Yep, absolutely. I agree with that.
Let's see. Our own account just asked, when does fair use come into play for this kind of a thing? Yeah.
Yeah, no, none of these things.
No.
Right.
It's
Well, yeah.
dangerous. Fair use is a defense in court. It's not a legal right ahead of time. So I know it's been for years, especially on YouTube, you'd see in the description, fair use, fair use, fair use, but they'll take you to court if they want to, and you can say fair use once you're in court. The idea is you don't want to get sued in the first place. You don't want to go to court in the first place. You don't want to risk your brand.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a very subjective, term, and it's really only for a specific use, which is if you're going through and critiquing a song, like as a music critic, and even then,
Mhm.
they can say, you listened too much, you didn't critique enough, but nobody's critiquing music on Twitch. There's no there's no bounds for
No,
fair use over
Right.
what we're talking about.
not at all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, like as you were saying, Mike, like the people who can decide if something is fair use are a judge and a jury, and like specific judges and specific juries, meaning that there will be different outcomes each time that you try to use that defense, depending on where you are and who's listening. So, like, it's a whole can of worms that if you open it, like, good luck.
Yeah, you don't.
Um,
You just don't want to go there in the first place.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, somebody in chat asked, I have to answer this question because it's very silly. Do you think people at Amazon and or Twitch are purposefully making the platform suck so that it will eventually die off? No.
No,
Like
I
like
don't
when
think
someone wants to break up with a girlfriend and they're like, maybe I can just get them to hate me enough, she'll just leave.
that.
Yeah, that generally seems like not a great
Yeah,
strategy
that's a
in either of these regards.
yeah, in business especially. I mean, Amazon's the biggest business. That's just not. I don't think that's a good strategy. If they wanted to shut down Twitch, they would just shut down Twitch.
Yeah, they
wouldn't
just pull the
close
plug.
doors. Yeah, and I think, like you said, Nathan, it's kind of on the edge of being profitable. I think
Mhm.
I'm assuming. I don't know that for sure, but hopefully they're taking steps to get it there and
Mhm.
protect the platform because there's a lot of us that's where our careers are. But yeah, I don't think they would purposely. They're doing the. I think the people at Twitch are doing what they can to keep. It's their jobs too, so it's not like they're doing the worst job. They will go into work and just sit there all day. I think there's a lot of people that work at Twitch that do care about what's going on and they're working really hard.
Oh yeah, yeah. To be clear, I've never gotten the impression that people at Twitch don't care.
No.
I think that a lot of people who work there care very much, but I think that Twitch is also an organization that is teams don't always communicate well, so a lot of things end up like either not being well coordinated or like I think speaking of that Amazon integration stuff, like kind of getting halfway done and then just sort of falling off. Um, and yeah, you just end up with a lot of loose ends, unfortunately. But I mean, people are of course trying; it's their job, and I think a lot of people who work there still care about the platform. I think the other thing they have to account for at this point is that Amazon's influence within Twitch has grown a lot in recent years. And so it often ends up being a matter of what Amazon wants to prioritize. Like I know at this point that Amazon pretty much fully runs their like sales and ads department, um, and like has an increasing amount of, I think, like control over various elements of like major streamers, big partners and stuff like that. So, and that's another thing that you can also kind of like sort of point to as a reason for Twitch maybe being slow to act on some stuff. Like it's changing. When a place is changing, that means that there's going to be turnover. There's going to be like a whole lot of other elements. And so as a result of that, like they're just not going to be able to do things as quickly because you'll have somebody new doing something that somebody used to do, being like, I don't really know how to do this that well yet. So it all just takes time, and none of it is really ideal. Hopefully, the platform will be good in the end, or will benefit in the end. But I guess we'll see in this regard. All that said, I think somebody asked earlier, and I'm curious to get your input. Do you think, especially with how this is all playing out, and the fact that at least for the time being, there's not really probably going to be music licensing on Twitch, and then there's also, all of these other changes happening. Do you think this makes YouTube a more attractive, viable alternative, especially given they're adding tons of new features of their own that are streaming specific, and they seem to really be trying to ramp up in that regard?
I mean, YouTube has its own issues to deal with as well. I
Mhm.
don't think this is like a Twitch is bad at this, YouTube is good at this. But I do think you take a step back and look at the forest instead of just the trees, uh, and the people's overall perception of Twitch is trending downwards. I think people are getting more and more frustrated, not just over this, but then also recently over the hate raids. everything going on with that. It's one thing after another that gets people frustrated, which the 30 seconds or sometimes 5 minutes of ads that are on live streams because of Amazon putting their hands in a little bit too deep. And yeah, people are just getting frustrated versus YouTube, which I think is taking huge strides forward, and people are excited about what they're doing there. And I don't know, maybe as YouTube live streaming becomes more popular, they'll start to deal with some of the issues, the same issues. But I mean, YouTube's been around a long time. I think they know how to handle these things a little bit better. So, in terms of DMCA, I think it's just one more, strike on the. I don't know what the metaphor is for that, but it's just another problem. But overall, I think people's perception of Twitch is going down, and people's excitement for YouTube gaming is going up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's definitely been a brand hit over the last few years, and I've been around Twitch since 2012, and that's where I've put most of my eggs, if you will. And yeah, I mean, as it's grown, the brand excitement has started to collapse a little bit, which is unfortunate because there was definitely a feeling of, when it was smaller, of course, and not owned by Amazon at the time, there was definitely like a grassroots feel, and you knew everybody, and it was this thing. But as it grew and became this massive thing, um, you got less attention by staff, and you know all these things happen just naturally because of the growth, which definitely I think has hurt sort of the brand, camaraderie and all of these issues, as we've discussed, are definitely hurting things in that regard. And of course, in any business that happens, this brand does something wrong or has some issues, well, then people start looking for similar brands without that specific issue, even if they have their own issues. And they start, some people jump ship right away. Some people are brand loyal, and it just, there's a lot of back and forth. But it's always been said in the content creation industry, you really should diversify your content, be on as many platforms as you can, just in case something happens to one of them. You've got a few other outlets for your content. So I think that advice stands, and I think people would be wise to just make sure they're not only on one platform, just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I actually think that's a very good note to end this segment on. So, thank both of you for taking the time to talk, and for coming on and everything.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Appreciate
of course. Yeah, it was a good time, and yeah, if I ever need you for similar segments, I'll let you know. Until then, talk to you later.
Yeah, like and subscribe.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like and subscribe, please. I'm begging you. That because I think that they're going to start leaving in. Yeah, we're just assume my mic is still hot. We're just bringing in some other people. We're going to do a segment about the second thing in our stream title now, which is esports match fixing. Stick around for that if you want to, or I don't know, if you got other stuff to do, go do other stuff. No, Redfish Games. I can answer your question. Would have loved to hear thoughts on CEO and COO of Twitch leaving. Yeah, I can quickly engage with that. I mean, I think that there are a few things happening there. I think one of them is the increasing influence of Amazon. I think that the other thing is that a lot of people who have been at Twitch for a long time either are tired of being there, because it wasn't just the CEO and COO. They've lost a ton of people this year. Like they've lost somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's see, I forget what it. No, I don't have that tab open here. They've lost hundreds of people basically. And like a lot of them were people who basically, as I understand it, they had been paid for previous stuff by way of stocks, and those stocks vested all around the same time over the summer. And so a whole bunch of people just left the company when they had sort of made the money that they could off of their stocks. But then, yeah, like the company itself is changing, and I think some people don't necessarily agree with the direction of it. And then on top of that, it seems like Twitch had a really, really good 2020 from the standpoint of numbers and growth. And I guess a lot of people asked for raises, and Twitch and Amazon were like, no. And so people were like, well, never mind. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people left for various different reasons. But what that means is that Twitch is very different in terms of its internal composition than it was even just a handful of months ago. So anyway, that's that. Now we can really move on to our next segment and introduce more people and have a grand time.
Was that an invitation for me to start doing introductions?
I guess so. I was gonna say no, just make you sit there, but no, yeah, I think you're good to go.
I'll gladly keep sitting here. I'm happy to just sit. I'm having it's a lovely day, sort of. But let's get into it. First of all, first and foremost, thank you for joining us, Danish, Alana. How are you doing, man? Introduce yourself to the stream.
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. I'm a senior writer for HLTV, so the leading site for Counter-Strike coverage. And I used to write for Dust2 US, who were the publication that initially released the leaked recording of MDL players match fixing.
That's right. So a bit of context for the viewers. I know there are some folks left over from the last conversation about Twitch. Around, God, the timeline is going to be hard to piece together, but Counter-Strike used to have this thing called the Mountain Dew League, or MDL. It was a sort of semi-pro league in which players who succeeded could move on up into the pro league and play with kind of higher tier teams. But I guess the path out of the Mountain Dew League wasn't always clear for a lot of players. And so to make money, a lot of them, or I wouldn't say a lot, but some players turned to match fixing, coordinating with teammates, coordinating with people on other teams in order to throw games after betting on those games in one way or the other and making money off of that. For a while, that just kind of happened. And then a few years ago, ESIC, which is the Esports Integrity Commission, announced that it would be investigating match fixing in the Mountain Dew League. Since then, a lot of the players have jumped ship to other games, most notably, I think, Valorant, which is Riot Games' new tactical shooter. And a lot of questions have arisen around whether the players who have jumped ship without any sort of punishment are going to face any long-term consequences for their behavior in the past, for their kind of obstruction of integrity in the past when they were in the Mountain Dew League. So first things first, Danish, my Counter-Strike context is pretty limited. I started playing tactical shooters with Valorant. That's about the time that I got into this story. I think the reason that I became interested in match fixing is that one of my first interviews with a Valorant professional, it was either Mixwell or someone from TSM. At the end of the interview, they kind of pulled me aside, in as much as you can pull someone aside over a Discord call. And they were like, have you heard anything about this match fixing investigation going on? And at the time I hadn't, but I started looking into it, started talking to more pros about it, and it sort of snowballed from there. But as I said, I don't have very much context for the Mountain Dew League. I wasn't around for that. So tell me a bit about what the Mountain Dew League was and why the problems arose there around match fixing.
Right. So the Mountain Dew League was essentially the path to the Pro League, which is like ESL's main league where all the professional teams play. And essentially what it used to be is that placing top in that league used to get you a spot in Pro League. And then in early 2020, I think January, they basically revamped Pro League and cut the slots in half effectively, which primarily ended up affecting a lot of North American teams, but also teams across the globe. And with that, it basically left a bunch of teams outside of Pro League, and a lot of teams that did have organizations sponsoring them no longer had that support, because a lot of those organizations were sponsoring them on the basis that these teams were already in Pro League. And then from there, with the Pro League slots cut and a lot of these organizations starting to pull out of the game, these players were sort of left to play in MDL just by themselves without any organizations. There are still players who have been playing since then who have not had an organization since, even though they've gotten back into Pro League and whatnot. And essentially what happened from there is that with Valorant releasing and also just in the lead up to that, a lot of these players started, not a lot of these players, but I would say some of the players in this league essentially started turning to match fixing as a way to make a quick buck or a way to make money. And from what Ian Smith, the commissioner of ESIC, has said, is that some portion of these players were basically involved in a betting syndicate. So essentially there would be an outside group who would come in and place the bets for them and then make the money off of that and distribute it to them. And then there was just players taking advantage of the situation, betting on matches themselves, knowing the outcome. And as far as I know, there was players who did not match fix themselves, but they knew of matches that were being fixed and they bet on those, knowing that they would get a payout.
So I think there are kind of two interesting tiers here, as you mentioned. One of those is players who are just kind of betting on the side, making, ludicrous sums. A lot of the reporters I've talked to who have covered this have mentioned just players with no professional prospects whatsoever, with no real winnings to speak of, sporting fancy watches, buying new cars, being kind of ostentatious with gains that seem to come out of nowhere. So there's that tier of things. But then, as you mentioned, one of the highlights of ESIC's investigation is this idea of foreign betting syndicates, specifically, I believe, Chinese and Russian betting syndicates. And in those countries where there are kind of, or were at times, more lax regulations on Bitcoin betting websites like that, those syndicates could coerce players or just work with players to fix games and then make ludicrous sums off of that. So there are kind of two tiers to this. One of those tiers has now the attention of the FBI, of kind of international law enforcement, and that I think is what put this investigation on a lot of people's radars. One thing I want to ask you about before we even get to reporting is how widely was this known among players, among journalists and fans, and so on before ESIC's investigation was made public?
So Eminem's, or Jeff Moore, the guy who published the Dust 2 article with the leaked recording, him and I were sort of working together into looking into a lot of this, and we heard about this as early as like March 2020. So this is before Valorant came out. This is, I want to say, 7 months before the initial ESIC report that they were even looking into this came out. And to that point, I don't think that ESIC, there's no way that ESIC would not have known that this was something that was occurring. And for me, the one thing that surprises me is that they waited so long to even announce that they were looking into it, because I think if they did that earlier, it would have probably dissuaded a number of people from even attempting it in the ensuing months.
Yeah. So how did this become an open secret, essentially? Because you go on, I know this isn't the most kind of vital source of information or source of chatter, but you go on, I don't know, the subreddit for Counter-Strike, the subreddit for Valorant, and the competitive scenes of both of those. And every time a player who is rumored to be implicated in this is brought up, the conversation inevitably goes to match fixing. It seems as though at this point, basically everybody knows. How did it get to that point where specific players are named, specific teams, specific organizations, and so on?
Well, a lot of these players who have transitioned to Valorant played in Premier or MDL back then with a lot of these other people who have been accused of match fixing. And on top of that, when it comes to match fixing in Counter-Strike at that level, at a certain point, it becomes very obvious that it's being done, which is why you have YouTube videos of people basically analyzing clips from different MDL games where you can very visibly see that some of these players are not trying to win the round whatsoever. And as someone who's watched people play at the MDL level for almost 4 to 5 years at this point, I can tell you right now that North American Counter-Strike was never so bad to the point that what was occurring in some of those clips was just bad players. Like it's just not realistic to even imagine that. To answer your original question, the way it became an open secret is that a lot of these players had heard about these players match fixing. They'd either heard it from someone else who was on a team, or they'd heard that a common thing I heard was that players were showing up in FPL, which was like the pug platform that a lot of these players play in after their practice matches for the day. A lot of these players are showing up into these pug platforms with like $3,000 knives, like in-game skins that they'd gotten. And these are, again, organizationless players. They don't have any sponsors or salary coming in, and they're just showing up with $3,000 knives, a $2,000 gun skin, all of that sort of stuff that's just appearing out of nowhere. And with that, it becomes like that plants a seed of suspicion, obviously. But then on top of that, a lot of these players are talking internally amongst each other. And to some point, it becomes very obvious with the combination of all of those factors that these players are not getting that money legitimately whatsoever.
Right. So I'm curious about that element of it, because in hindsight, it seems pretty obvious when these players who like were organizationless were showing up with like nice things that they clearly got via having money. Like, why do you think that they just decided to be so flagrant about it when it seemed like it was posing a risk to them to do so?
The only answer to that I can possibly have is just hubris and not thinking that they're ever going to get caught.
Mhm.
And I mean, to their point, it's been almost 2 years and nothing has been done as of yet.
Right. Well, yeah, somebody in chat just pointed out that one of the players who I guess is accused just got second at Berlin. So like still chucking along.
I
One
think
of the alleged people involved.
Yeah, right. Allegedly, of
Yes.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
one of the lessons of Berlin, because that player was asked a question about, hey, are you worried about upcoming investigations about this? And the response was, I don't know. I think it varied from like antagonistic to incredulous. But I got a text from a friend who just kind of ambiently heard about this after the fact, and he watched the video and he was like, this makes it so apparent that all of these pros are essentially high schoolers. And I mean, some of them are. Some of them are taking a year off of, the beginning of university or the end of high school. And so the level of maturity is not there. The understanding of consequence, I think, is not there. And that comes across in behavior in games, that comes across in interactions with press, and so on. So I actually I want to ask Danish about your reporting in this context. After Marv, the player who was alleged to have match fixed, was asked about this at Berlin, the owner of Envy reached out, or didn't rather reach out, but kind of put you on blast on Twitter, said, I can't believe you guys are dredging stuff like this up, and so on. And you kind of shot back by saying, I've been working on this for years. Like, I am no stranger to investigating match fixing. Tell me a bit about your work in that context. What have you been working on? What does an investigation into match fixing in the MDL even look like?
Right. So when we being M&Ms and I first heard about this early into 2020, we started poking around and asking players who we knew in MDL basically what they'd heard, who they thought was involved, any evidence that they thought was that they'd been sent or been managed to get themselves. And we basically had people sending us different screenshots. Unfortunately, a lot of it was circumstantial or hearsay, and as such, it wasn't anything definitive. But again, we still had other things that were sent our way that we never could actually follow up on because it ended up getting stonewalled by betting groups or betting companies that didn't want to release information. And as such, which that's part of why it sort of also ended up getting escalated to ESIC, because they have the sort of channels to actually deal with some of that. And we also ended up talking to Richard Lewis, sharing some of our information with him, especially when the leaked recording came about and we had obtained that. We actually got sent that relatively early on, not early on, but well before we published it. And eventually it sort of just got distributed around. And with that, it sort of just, once the leaked recording kind of got out there, there was sort of a second wave where people started reaching out with a little bit more that they'd heard. But again, it's hard to get anything definitive in the end. For a lot of the
things, one of the things I want to ask about is, what is the nature of the evidence? Because I've heard a lot about, a lot of these pros are having conversations in, say, Snapchat, and so conversations about this just vanish essentially. You cannot keep a ledger of people talking about match fixing, people, flaunting their wealth to friends on a platform like that. What was the kind of nature of the evidence you were getting? Was it screenshots from Discord, mostly audio, which I can't imagine it was? Was it screenshots from Snapchat? Tell me about kind of what that looked like.
So for what I was sent, it was stories from other players who were either in calls or in team speaks or around people who were discussing teammates who had fixed. There was also situations where I was sent actual screenshots of betting slips that were basically betting slips that these players were saying were ones that had been placed on these fixed matches. And as far as what I was sent, I never got any Snapchat or any disappearing app sort of conversations. From my understanding, I think Richard Lewis definitely does have some of those. And I think that ESIC probably has a large amount more, just because a lot of players did reach out to them directly as well, as far as I know. So a lot of what I have is stories from players saying who was involved, stuff they'd heard from teammates of players, and then the occasional betting slip screenshot as well of what had been placed.
I want to ask a bit about the pros who have come to you and told you stories like this, because what I found so fascinating, and I'm curious if this kind of description resonates with you, after Berlin, I saw very little from what I would call official or institutional esports. Very little conversation about the allegations raised at Berlin. Pro players weren't really talking about it. Aside from Envy's owner, no one was really discussing it openly. Casters, analysts, developers, the conversation was pretty limited, I think, to press and people who are kind of press watchers and following stuff happening in the scene. I'm curious, first of all, if that description resonates with you, but also I wonder if you have a sense for why that's the case. If you're getting, tips from pros, why isn't there more discussion amongst pros? Why isn't there more demand amongst pros to root out bad actors?
Yeah, I think that's been one of my biggest concerns throughout this whole affair, is the lack of pros speaking up or taking a stand for it, because some of these pros who've moved to Valorant 100% know of a lot of the players who were involved, or at least a handful of players who were involved. And yet these same players have managed to land on professional teams, be salaried for over a year at this point. It's a little bit absurd to me that that's even reached that point. As far as the conversation on Twitter, for example, is concerned, I think I've seen players from Counter-Strike discuss it a little more. Publicly, I see not that many other players discussing it, but I can tell you, even after that conversation with Astro, I had players reaching out to me privately saying that thank you for speaking up. I can't say anything, but thank you for trying to say something publicly. So there is an awareness behind it. It's just not a lot said publicly about it from these players.
Yeah, That makes perfect sense. I want to go back to a thing you mentioned about kind of gambling sites and betting sites. My understanding is that a lot of these sites are partnered with ESIC because that partnership helps them look like their business is clean, the stuff that they're doing has integrity. But at the same time, as you're telling it, they don't seem to want to be particularly forthcoming with their data. My understanding from conversations I've had are that uh, when these betting site operators have been contacted by ESIC or contacted by law enforcement, that has been a source of profound consternation and fear, even though technically they're partnered. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a bit about what it was like getting in touch with these betting sites, the kind of nature of the resistance you found, um, and kind of how that aligns with their space in the Counter-Strike ecosystem, which has had a lot of betting around it, and Valorant, which comparatively has basically none at all.
Yeah, so for me personally, I never heard back from the two sites that I contacted. I know that I believe DK, who's a former CS journalist and now he's I think a talent manager or player manager at a talent agency. He also had reached out to a betting company and they basically stonewalled him. And my understanding behind that is essentially that some of these players who were betting on these matches were underage in their wherever they were located, whether it be the U.S. or Canada, and as such, these companies would then be liable, and they would open themselves up to prosecution because they're allowing underage actors to basically bet on their platform and then withdraw money in Bitcoin or whatever form of currency. Which is also really weird because a lot of these platforms should have some form of identity verification to even do that in the first place.
I have a question, which is that previously, before I think any of this stuff came to light, Counter-Strike had a fairly bad gambling problem for a minute there, that it was sort of facilitated through like Steam and Valve's platform and skins and stuff like that. Does that tie into any of this? Just that like tendency for there to be kind of like underage gambling within the Counter-Strike ecosystem? Or would you like designate these as fairly separate phenomena that just happen to look kind of similar?
I think they're fairly separate.
Mhm.
The only thing that maybe would tie in is the fact that it was that there was not necessarily any sort of bar to being able to gamble skins, and as such, there were just people who were underage betting on these
Mhm.
matches. So I think the only thing there would be that because of that lack of a barrier, maybe some of these players didn't quite understand the ramifications of what they were doing
Mhm.
when it scaled up to betting on matches.
Right. So it's similar mechanisms that allowed it to happen, or at least allowed players to feel okay about doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious about. Again, I want to ask about the act of reporting on something like this. Um, as you mentioned, you had a audio recording of players discussing match fixing, months before. First of all, it was published by Dust2, and then similarly, way before it was even acknowledged by ESIC publicly. I'm curious about the barriers you face trying to report stories that you have, and kind of why you've held off on publishing certain pieces. I know people, even like Richard Lewis, have held off on publishing stories out of consideration, I suppose, for the scene, for the integrity of the investigation. But I'm curious about, how it's felt holding off on like big earth-shattering stories like this, and what the specific barriers are in your mind.
I mean, in terms of how it's felt pretty awful knowing that it's been happening and knowing that a lot of these players are being able to just run off to Valorant and continue having a professional career when they basically ruin the integrity of North American Counter-Strike. That really, really just sucks as a whole. As far as reporting it, again, a lot of the actual definitive evidence that we could have gotten comes down to being able to get that betting evidence. And for that, we sort of had to defer to ESIC. especially when ESIC is sort of a lot of these companies can only enforce some form of a suspension until ESIC makes a ruling. So, for example, with the leaked recording, ESEA imposed a suspension for the players who were involved up until ESIC concluded an investigation into the leaked recording. So, again, in the end, no matter what, it's going to come down to ESIC's ruling, just because of the way these bodies are set up at this point. So, deferring to them, in the end, it's the lesser of two evils. Unfortunately, I wish that they weren't waiting as long as they are. Obviously, the investigation takes time, but there's also other factors involved in terms of why it takes them longer. For example, like Riot Games also announced that they're investigating this individually at this point. So a lot of these things sort of combine into it taking much longer than it needs to conclude. But ESIC are the ones who essentially have to have that final call in this scenario.
I'm curious about your kind of perspective on the ecosystem. Is there a reason that ESIC is the last call on questions like this? In theory, can't Valve, when confronted with an audio recording of what I think is pretty transparently a discussion of match fixing, even if ESIC's final ruling was a bit more lenient around what was circumstantial, what was kind of firmly rooted, firmly kind of grounded, and possible to judge on. Why wouldn't a developer like Valve simply take action and say, we are going to be super buttoned up on this. We are going to just kind of immediately move on this.
Valve takes an extremely hands-off approach with basically anything when it comes to Counter-Strike. So, for example, even back when Richard Lewis initially released the iBuyPower report in 2014 or 2015, Valve did not act until he had basically a text message saying that they did it on hand, and then he again still had to back channel and call them, and it took them far longer after there was more than enough evidence behind the fact that these players had been involved in match fixing for Valve to actually do anything. So Valve won't act on any of this until there's something so definitive that you absolutely cannot counter it in any way. Even with that leaked recording being as seemingly definitive as it was, it's just not something that Valve would act on up until ESIC make a ruling. The same thing with the coaching bug, for example. They waited until ESIC had concluded their investigation into that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I suppose there's also the question of legal liability. When I've spoken with ESIC, they've talked about, any ruling they make can have profound implications on a person's future, their career, their standing in the scene. And so they want to be not as lenient, but they want to be as kind of careful in their rulings as possible. It's just also struck me that I think to a certain extent, Valve and other developers who lean on ESIC can effectively kind of outsource the work of integrity to this, 5-person team based in Australia and the UK, most of whom, or some of whom are part-time, some of whom are contractors. It doesn't seem like a sustainable solution to the problem.
It is a very Valve solution to the problem, though.
Yeah.
Valve generally likes to run fairly lean in most things that they do, at least relative to the size of the company, which is like they are insanely profitable, but they have long had a habit of either being like, okay, well, we're going to be hands off with the scenes around our games, not just Counter-Strike, all of them. And then also like the impression I get of Valve internally is if somebody doesn't want to do something, then often it just doesn't really happen. No one really handles it. And so, yeah, I mean, I would have to guess that Valve looks at this and says, that'll resolve itself. That's not really our problem.
Yeah. I think another part of it is also just, as some people in chat are alluding to, the money is not in esports.
No.
And so if, Counter-Strike or North American Counter-Strike in particular is kind of a poisonous scene, or if things are going bad there, Valve really doesn't have a clear incentive to act, because it's not like that's bringing in a tremendous amount of money for them. It's not that that's kind of a core part of their business. I don't have a sense of Valve's finances, but I am sure esports is not
Yeah.
a really big part, or even like a noticeable part in the pie
No,
chart.
compared to Steam, it's nothing.
Yeah.
That's why people are talking about Dota, which like that is a good point. I mean, like the international at least is, definitely gets them a lot of attention, makes a lot of money. But even then, people are saying like they are hands on with Dota, but compared to like Riot and League of Legends, I think they're still pretty hands off.
Yeah, exactly. There's a question in the chat. Danish, do you have faith in ESIC despite its limitations?
I have faith in ESIC to eventually make a ruling. I think the only concern I've ever really had with them is the fact that it takes so long. I think the other issue with them is that initially they struggled because they also implemented bans in Australia for betting on matches initially. But the problem was that there was nothing in the ESCA rulebook that said that you can't do that, even though they're governed by ESIC, and ESIC's rules say that you should not bet on matches if you're at a certain league at a certain level. So because of that, some bans ended up having to be reversed, and there's a lot of appeals happening. I don't know to what degree a lot of those players were involved, just because I have no insight into the Australian scene. But again, that same scenario is likely something that ESIC has probably had to deal with in North America, where there were players who were betting not knowing that it was wrong, but were also not involved in the match fixing aspect of it. So that's also likely part of why it's taken a little bit longer. And in the end, especially with the FBI involved, I think there will be justice. It's just the fact that it's taking so long, which is the reason a lot of people are very frustrated, and rightly so, I think.
Absolutely. I want to dig in a tiny bit into your interactions with Hastro, Envy's owner, recently. One of the things I'm particularly curious about is that you couldn't call someone like Hastro, who has a competitive background, you could not call him hands off when it comes to esports, or unaware. He is not somebody coming from a venture capital group, for example, and parachuting into esports. And yet, under his, I guess, oversight, there's still teams picking up alleged match fixers, picking up players that have bad reputations in the scene. I'm curious to get your perspective. Why are players like that still finding opportunities in esports, despite having pretty widely publicized kind of skeletons in the closet?
To be honest, that's a really hard question to answer, because I don't know. I don't know why these players are getting a chance, especially ones that are, I guess, very widely known to have been involved in match fixing. There's, even outside of Marv, there's other players that have been accused of match fixing that are on professional teams still, that are relatively well known. And for that, it's just surprising that they are even given that chance. And on the note of Hastro, I'm not sure why in his tweet he was talking about journalists doing investigations, when first of all we have them, but second of all, you would think that the organization hiring these people would do their own investigation into the players they're trying to pick up before they actually let them sign a contract, because I could have told you this would be a PR nightmare for them well before they picked him up. And the same goes for other teams. I think at this point, some of these organizations are probably thinking that, oh, this player is too good to let some other team pick up, even with the ramifications that could come with it. And that might be the case for someone like Marv, who seemingly is decent at Valorant, but his mistakes, like his past mistakes, aren't forgiven just because he can shoot well in a video game. And I think it's sort of absurd that they're still given that chance just because of that.
Yeah, I think that is a particularly relevant question, and that dynamic you described of this player's too good to let him go someplace else is particularly relevant right now. I mean, I can think of a similar example, similar but different, in Sinatra, who is kind of accused of sexual misconduct, and still there are constant kind of uh, a lot of journalists who report on roster moves talking about speculation of like, this team really wants to pick up Sinatra right now. This team really wants to pick up Sinatra. Um, and it sort of feels like, as you've described, the dynamic is, this person is too good to let go, even if this is going to be a PR nightmare, even if this is going to alienate like a third of our fans, because in the grand scheme of things, pros are still friends with these people, be they Sinatra or be they match fixers. Coaches have good relationships there, and a lot of fans, still support these players no matter what their indiscretions are.
Right. That also feels like a byproduct of a lot of these players, having online lives that go beyond just playing the game. Like they have their own individual fan bases and they have people who follow them as people would any sort of influencer. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just kind of a byproduct of that relationship with people who now compete professionally in video games, is that where once it would have been that these people would have been defined by their indiscretions, especially if they were as bad as match fixing or doing abusing another human being. Now people are like, well, that's just one thing they did, and I still watch them stream and stuff like that, or I still like them anyway. Which is not necessarily an ideal state of affairs, because I think there should be consequences for these kinds of actions, but it does seem to be sort of where we're at.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, what really surprised me with this whole conversation with Hastro, and also with your press conference clip, was that there's a surprising number of people who are fans, whether it be viewers or players of Valorant, who have no idea who some of these players are and what they did or allegedly did in Counter-Strike. And that was, to some degree, I understood that there would be people who had no idea, but just the fact that it hasn't been discussed enough, that a lot of these players have no clue who these people are and what their history is shocking to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a universe in which, no pro player had ever referenced the investigation to me. I would have never known. And, somebody else asking that question at the Berlin press conference would have been the first time I'd heard. There are these kind of parallel worlds in esports, I think, where people who are engaged know, because every conversation about this player inevitably circles back to that. And people who engage through, kind of to go back to Nathan's idea, through streams, through Twitch, through an org's content on YouTube, have no idea, have kind of just the sanitized perspective on who these players are, who they are as people in their kind of day-to-day lives, but no conception whatsoever of their past, of their career, and so on.
Yeah. Well, it's also I think that it gets to the heart of why using esports as a term is sometimes incorrect, because esports is not a monolith. It's a bunch of different games, and there's obviously overlaps within the industry and who owns various teams and things like that. But in terms of what people are following, there's frequently, people will be really into one game and the people playing that game, and they just have no idea what's happening in another. And so when you have people moving from one game to another, they can kind of, in some ways obscure their pasts simply by just saying, okay, well, piecing out from this one to go to that one.
Yeah. I'm always genuinely surprised to learn stuff about pros who I know through Valorant, and then I realize oh, there was a year-long thing where everybody thought this pro was hacking because he was so good. Or, oh, there was this year-long thing where everyone was really mad at this player who is now beloved in Valorant because he never got along with anybody, and he had a rascally reputation. And I happen to learn those things just because it's to a certain extent my job to know these things. But if I were a fan getting into Valorant right now, there's no way, there's not an easy on-ramp for me to get back into CS, into the back catalog, learn about what these players' careers were before. And even there are certain outlets that do I think, interesting work kind of chronicling a player's career. There are a lot of YouTube videos about like this, rising star in Valorant used to be XYZ. But even in some of those cases, the coverage is more celebratory than here's an interesting thing or maybe under discussed or maybe not so positive thing from this person's past. So there are really a lot of barriers to learning about what a person's past was, kind of some of the more unsavory things they may have been involved in, and so on. There's a lot in chat I'm looking right now about specific players. Danish, actually, I guess I'll ask an off-topic question that somebody asked here. Do you believe that the NACS scene will come back to where it was pre-2019?
I think eventually it's definitely going to take a lot of time. I was actually at Philadelphia 2 weeks ago, which is basically the largest like amateur North American LAN that's been around for a long time. A lot of the players who are now playing pro in Valorant, that was their first LAN that they ever went to. It was one of their first chances to meet like other pros who played Counter-Strike. And it was actually really interesting because a lot of the players who were at this event had either not been to a LAN before, or it was one of their first LANs, or as I was talking to the person who created it, Steve, the average age group for Philadelphia used to be probably around 24 or so, and in this one he thinks it was probably around 20. So a lot of the players who are now at these LANs are much younger. They're less experienced, but they're also players who have only played CSGO. And so I think, yes, the scene will bounce back. It'll probably still take another year or two to get close to the pre-2019 levels. Could even take longer than that, just based on the level of play that we were at.
Yeah. There's another question here. Didn't FaZe drop Marved for his reputation? And that is something I can't claim exact causation here. Marved, again, is one of the kind of, I guess, the hub, the catalyst for this discussion, because he was the player who performed at Berlin, who won Envy, I guess, a second place spot at Valorant's second global event. But as for FaZe dropping him, FaZe was the team he was on before. The one thing I can say, and I don't have particular confidence in this, but I reached out to FaZe shortly after they picked up Marved, and I reached out to their PR person, was like, hey, do you guys know about this person's reputation? What is your response to this been? Is this something the team has discussed widely? Like, how are you moving forward from that? And then I checked the timestamps a couple days ago, and I think in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks after he was gone, I think some teams are starting to get wise to the reputations of their players. But at the same time, you also have teams who are not responsive to that whatsoever. There's one team in particular that's going to be playing in the Valorant Last Chance qualifier that has at least 2 players who are implicated in the exact same thing that Marved is implicated in. I'm pretty sure they were all on a team together, in fact. And that has not deterred them at all. It's not clear that anything is going to change. So I think the more professional an organization is, maybe the more they'll kind of take that sort of thing into account. But it's not clear to me that anything is really going to change until ESIC wraps up its investigation.
Yeah, I mean, on your topic as well, is that I know that there was journalists and just general industry actors who reached out to some of these teams in advance to let them know of some of these people. And I know that there's also teams that reached out to journalists who were involved in investigating some of these MDL players and match fixing in general, to ask preemptively whether they should pick this player up or whether this player was in the clear. And for that, I think I have to express appreciation to those teams who actually proactively do that and then don't pick those players up. But on that topic, as far as I know, NV was informed of Mars history or alleged history, and they still knowingly picked him up after that, which to me is just there's no excuse for that from an organization.
Yeah, they there was a bit of weaselly language in Hastro's response to the allegations, where he said any player who's proven to have kind of disrupted the integrity in a game we compete in will be removed from our teams. And there's no evidence Marv has behaved in any kind of unsavory fashion as he's played Valorant. I don't think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Envy has fielded a Counter-Strike team in a while. So that also doesn't really fit the criteria. They're not involved in that scene anymore. So there is, even by the standards of that kind of forceful statement, a way out if they're kind of caught in the crossfire here, if they're caught out to have fielded someone, an alleged match fixer.
Also, as an addendum, we've talked a lot about organizations picking these players up, but a lot of these players are well aware of some of the histories of these players who've now moved to Valorant who were involved in match fixing, and yet they seemingly are okay with being on the same team or being in the same scene as a lot of these players who and trust me when I say this, they absolutely know that these players were involved in match fixing, but they're all okay with sharing a team, sharing a scene with them without speaking up publicly about it or making any declaration or allowing them to be on the same team without any pushback. And that is also really concerning to me, because that's also part of the reason match fixing got so ingrained and became such a large issue in North America, is because these players had their own little boys club where these people were fixing and not telling anyone, and they were all okay with it internally in their tiny groups. And when you reach that point, then it just gets out of control really quickly.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's perfectly stated. And in the course of all of these investigations, E6 investigations by individual journalists who have good relationships with a lot of these players, in the course of Riot's investigation with Sports Radar, players find out about who's implicated, about who's being asked about. This is a pretty, the scene is like a leaky ship, so to speak. There are not really well kept secrets in the scene. So like, candidly, I've heard about betting operators get a list of players who they need to turn over information about, or bettors that they need to turn over information about, and those lists go directly to players. Like, players learn about this, players in the scene find out through chatter. As you said, people know, and they really have no issue, or have not made any kind of a stink about some of the bad actors in the scene. I think that is probably a good note to end on, unless, Nathan, do you have any more questions?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm pretty good on this front.
Rad. Well, Danish, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you answering a lot of these questions, cluing us in on some CS stuff that, frankly, I have big gaps on. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
Mm. And yeah, just for the people watching, we're still not done with the actual show. That's just the end of another segment. I feel like we use the word end too liberally. And people are like, oh, well, bye then. It's like, no, wait, come back. But yeah, thank you for coming on, Danish. You can go as
Absolutely.
you please.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, so now for people who are not familiar with the show or have not tuned in before, I'm going to do a quick kind of like, basically just kind of summing up some stories that have happened throughout the week to sort of wind things down. So yeah, let's begin with, let's see, there's a lot of Activision Blizzard stuff that happened this week. that was kind of our main story last week. So, oh wait, we appear to have, we're doing a be right back. Okay, I'll dig into this after that screen goes away because I'm also watching the stream. Okay, we're back. Cool, good. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, digging into some stories that have happened this week for the sake of discussion and things like that. So yeah, there's been a ton of Activision Blizzard stuff that happened this week. The biggest one being that the SEC is now investigating Activision Blizzard over sexual harassment and discrimination allegations. The sort of previous suit that was filed against them came from the state of California. And so this is now a federal agency, which makes it a much more elevated type of situation. And which means that on one hand, that does mean that, yeah, the federal government is involved. On the other hand, it's sort of like I think that people who are in the know are skeptical of whether or not much is going to come of this, mainly because SEC investigations tend to be about investors. And so, like, for one, they probably will not turn up much more information than what's already out there, what's been reported on, which is quite a lot. And for two, it's going to be about specifically whether this implicates the heads of their studios and like in ways that directly harmed investors. And so, like, a good parallel to this that I found useful, mainly because I've been listening to a podcast about it recently, is what happened with Enron back in the 90s, which is basically that Enron also got found out for like basically a series of things involving major like fraud and things like that. And it was specifically like through, or the tipping point was an SEC investigation. But the only people who really got paid back for the numerous damages that Enron caused were investors. Investors got paid, I believe, in some total millions or billions of dollars. Employees from Enron who were like harmed in various ways got paid, like, I think a settlement that went to like, it totaled out to some minuscule amount for everybody, like a couple $100 or something, just nothing. And then like Enron had also basically done this thing where they like claimed that they didn't have like energy was being allocated in such a way where like various states needed to buy more from them. And this happened during a like major blackout that caused untold trouble in, I think, California. And that wasn't even actually against the law. So people who dealt with that didn't get anything. So yeah, SEC investigations can have major consequences, but they're generally within the financial sector. They're not so much anywhere else.
Yeah, I think if the SEC had been, the first body to announce an investigation, then you could credibly say like, oh, this is SEC investigation matters because it brought this to light. But given that it's not like a tipping point investigation, given that it feels very much like a follow-up to California's investigation, it just feels like, I don't know, a speck compared to the investigation in California right now, which I think is much more substantial. The report that came out around that, or not report, but the lawsuit that came out around that was fairly detailed, fairly graphic, pretty disturbing in some of the stuff that was alleged there. That is going to have a much more profound impact on how people conceive of Activision, what happens with Activision going forward, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so then in the meantime, there's also actually another suit filed last week that we talked about, but that or that we talked about on last week's show, that was specifically with regards to Activision, like engaging in worker intimidation and union busting style tactics and stuff like that. So I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that after last week's show, we ended up publishing a story about kind of ongoing unionization efforts within the video games industry, both here, where like in the United States, there just aren't really that many definite efforts to do so because it's really hard because of laws that tend to be very lenient on employers who engage in union busting. But also, like, there are companies in other countries that have successfully unionized in the games industry and have been able to sort of, take more direct efforts in dealing with things like workplace mistreatment. In the case of companies like Paradox, which is based in Sweden, there are a lot of Swedish companies that have unionized because that is the main way that Swedish labor law kind of works. In America, we actually, in some ways, have stronger labor laws than Sweden, which is wild, because our labor laws are really, really bad. but it's in part because unions, big union conglomerates, handle so much of enforcement that the laws can kind of afford to be a little bit loosey gooseier, or whatever the term you want to use is.
No, loosey gooseier is great. That's a fantastic term for this.
Thank you. I'm going to start using it from now on.
Yeah,
I just used it now for the first time.
I'll just say that is a fantastic story, and I encourage everyone to go to launcher.gg and read it. One of the things that was most striking to me is that it's almost like reading it kind of opened my third eye to a certain extent. It extended the kind of scope of my imagination about unionization in America in the context of like, a lot of people talk about how hard it is to organize tech workers, how hard it is to organize game developers. And then you cross the pond and those companies are organized in Europe.
Mhm.
Unionization happens there. There are these big unions. Now, of course, as you alluded to, there are all these differences in the history, in kind of union action, in legal frameworks that make unionization and organizing more difficult in the US. But
Mhm.
it's almost like as I said, yeah, the scope of my imagination around what is possible with unions, what unions can achieve for game workers shifted after reading your story, because it is happening elsewhere,
Yeah.
and it is not an unfathomable proposition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, depending on who you talk to, I think that a lot of people look at that situation now in North America and say that it is a matter of when, not if, for major video game studios to unionize. Because there are just too many endemic problems at this point, too many systemic issues, too many things that workers face, that in order to like, the kind of central juxtaposition is that to deal with them right now, workers generally need to engage in like direct action. They just need to like do things that actually hurt the company's bottom line, whether that's striking or any number of other like major actions that are hard to take your eyes off of. And then in the longer run, unionize so they can prevent the sort of things that are being uncovered right now from becoming major issues again later. And so that's kind of the broader tension, I guess, that a lot of companies are experiencing right now. But I think that given time, companies within the US games industry will unionize. I think there's just not really a better way forward at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think the more conversation around the subject there is, the better.
Mhm.
There was somebody in the story, somebody quoted in the story, it might have been Emma Kinema,
Yeah.
works for Code CWA, who
Mhm.
talked about, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact quote, but essentially the like very American brainworm of like not wanting to be a part of a union, fearing kind of participation in a union. They kind of,
Mhm.
I wouldn't say culture of fear around joining a union, but the ingrained sentiment, the growing sentiment even, that a union isn't kind of worth messing with, isn't worth the time, is too difficult. And I think continued conversations in the games industry, continued coverage, and even lawsuits like this one are slowly changing the tide, changing the conversation around that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But yeah, and so that's kind of, for now, things aren't quite there yet. Again, the Activision Blizzard employees I spoke to basically said, part of the reason why they're approaching things the way they are right now is because a lot of people are afraid of the U word. They hear that and they kind of back out. But if you tell them like, hey, we're going to strike or we're going to do a walkout or whatever, people are like, yeah, this feels like the time because I'm fired up. So, again, it's kind of weird. They're using union tactics, but they don't want to unionize. But I think that, again, given time, things will change. To finish out the Blizzard stuff, it's just worth noting that this week, 2 high-profile people left the company. A lead on Overwatch 2 just took off. Yeah, it's been at Blizzard since 2016, worked on both Overwatch games, departed last Friday. And then also Blizzard's chief legal officer quit, which is very interesting considering what Blizzard is going through right now, a major lawsuit. So,
Yeah,
I think
probably
if nothing else,
not a
this,
great sign.
yeah, you would probably think that you'd want your chief legal officer to stick around for something like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if nothing else, this shows that the entire lawsuit is taking a toll on a lot of people at Blizzard for different reasons. A lot of people that I've known for years who worked there for the longest time, like before I ever even started covering Blizzard professionally in my capacity as a journalist, have left the company or are, talking about leaving. So yeah, I mean, it's a one way or another, there will be a major sea change over there. Let's see. Other fun things. Another thing we reported on this week is that Apple has decided Fortnite still can't return to the App Store until the verdict is final, and that may include appeals and things like that. So it could be years before Fortnite is back on Apple platforms, which is quite a consequence.
Yeah, which makes sense. I understand. Like, I think there is a some people might kind of wish cast to a certain extent and think like almost personify Apple and being like, oh, Apple's like being vindictive by doing this. They're kicking Epic while they're down. Like, no, I understand why you wouldn't allow the game back on your platform until all of the legal questions are resolved, and especially when kind of the other party is intent on keeping this legal question open indefinitely until they get the result that they want. So I'm not terribly surprised by this. I think it's good that we kind of hear from Apple on this, and they've kind of put the nail in the coffin for Fortnite for now. But I wouldn't say that this is unexpected.
Right. Yeah. Oh, definitely not. I mean, it's one of those things where on one hand, it makes perfect sense. On the other hand, like I have been enjoying watching these two big companies be very petty to each other. I mean, like that started, even before they actually ended up in court, but it's all just been like, yeah, companies are not people too. And it was a huge mistake that we decided to regard them that way. But occasionally you do get to see them duke it out in the petty ways that normal people often would. Also,
Yeah.
I hate to draw attention to technical problems, but okay, there we go. There was a weird thing happening with our cameras. It's all fixed now. It's fine. You all saw nothing, and I said nothing. So, moving on.
I didn't see anything.
Exactly. No one did. And if they claim otherwise, then we're going to come for you. But anyway, other Fortnite news that is totally different, but is just really something is we got a Fortnite fashion collab, and it's really quite bad.
Can I just
Actually, wait, quickly, don't look at what I pulled up. How much do you think that this shirt costs?
You know what? Okay, this is my big game right now, as people might have guessed from the last segment, is Valorant.
Is Fortnite. Well,
no, come on,
screw that
come
up.
on. And the cosmetics there are so expensive that I think I might even guess on the higher end.
That's what I mean. This is a real shirt. This is a real shirt you can buy and physically own and put on your own body in the real world as well as in the
Fortnite
game.
Balenciaga. I'm gonna say $59.
Man, if only. That would be a deal for this shirt that costs $425.
No shot. Come on.
Yeah. There's a hoodie that costs $725, and it's like very just mundane. Here, it's just the one that a character's wearing up here.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a standard hoodie with a logo on it. Like nobody put any effort into this collaboration, and it rules.
To be perfectly honest, I sort of assumed that the first fashion brand to like get in bed with Fortnite would be Supreme, because that feels like a perfect fit to me. The give them nothing girl Balenciaga that we see on display here, it is just like from another planet for me. I don't understand why it's happening. I don't understand anything about it. I simply do not get it. We actually like. I feel like I'm primed to understand this because we ran a story, I would say 3 or 4 months ago, about fashion and esports and streetwear and kind of game developers intersecting and the work of the two fields intertwining. And that sort of put me in kind of an understanding headspace of, okay, I see why both sides are doing this, what they could both get out of this. And then I look at the images you've got on the screen right now, and I'm drawing complete blanks. I do not get it. I don't understand the shirt that you asked me about that cost $425. None of it
Mhm.
scans for me at all.
Yeah, this hoodie that costs $775. What I
Ugh.
want, what they need to do, what they should have done, is released this dog mask as a thing that I could own. I'd pay $400 for that, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most striking part of this image, honestly.
Yeah,
The
it's
dog in the hoodie.
in sunglasses. It's beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, Balenciaga, or however you pronounce that name, here's your free advice. Um, if you make this product, you can sell it to me, the person who came up with the idea. Um, anyway, moving on from that, just quickly wanted to touch on YouTube is really stepping up its game in terms of adding streaming features. Valkyrie, who would know because she's one of the most popular streamers on YouTube, said that it's basically working on its own version of Twitch Prime and gifted subs, which are both things that people have really wanted to see from YouTube. Basically, this means that people will be able to give subscriptions to other people in chat and subscribe in a way that like takes away ads and things like that. In any case, like major kind of Twitch features that I think are ubiquitous on that platform, and that ultimately, if they make their way here, then that will make this. It will improve things for people on YouTube, because I think right now people come over from YouTube and lose a lot of viewers, and at least need to have a way to make up the difference in terms of the money that they make. And so yeah, like this goes a portion of the way toward making that happen. And so yeah, then they also added like another new feature this week, membership anniversary notifications. So basically, you can know how long somebody has been subscribed to you, and if that subscription is up, you can remind them to resubscribe. Basic usability stuff that again makes it easier to make money.
Yeah.
Also,
All of that feels. Oh, sorry. All of
I
that
was just
feels
gonna point out that
so. So you go ahead. You go ahead.
I'm just going to point out that Mike, our boss, is in chat, and he just said the dog mask is much more versatile, would wear far more regularly than that shirt. Yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt with something that dumb.
No. Here's the thing. I was choosing not to address Mike's comments. I have the chat pulled up as well, because Mike has set himself up so perfectly for a burn, to get dunked on, to get completely roasted with this comment about the dog mask. It is simply too tantalizing a prospect to even acknowledge. But I won't do it. I am exercising
I think you should
restraint.
do it.
I'm
I
not
think
going
you
to
should
do
do
it.
it.
Come on.
Content is content.
Mike is my
If you
friend.
get fired for saying something, that's like the apex of content.
Yeah, I mean you're right. Yeah, but no, it would be too evil. It would be simply too evil to I mean, come on. Mike served it up to me on a platter. But I'm not going to do it because I'm a nice guy, and I simply could not do that to my boss.
Well, I'm disappointed.
The more banal thing I was going to say is that the stuff you were describing feels so default to Twitch right now. Like just being able to say how long you were subscribed for in chat. Like it is the easiest thing in the world. It is right there. It is frictionless. I can only imagine making the jump to YouTube and then not having that and feeling like there's like a phantom limb, essentially.
Right.
Like this stuff should be here and it's not.
Right, exactly. And again, it just means that like for anybody who's not a massive streamer, the barrier to entry is that much higher, because you have to like make your way over and just accept that you're going to be making like significantly less money for a while. And most streamers just can't afford to do that because their margins are already pretty thin. But yeah, in other moves that YouTube is making, Discord is testing official YouTube integration, which is interesting because Discord very recently disabled a couple of like YouTube kind of plugins that people are using for music, Groovy and Rhythm bots as they were known. And so I guess this kind of explains why, probably because they were like, oh, well, we're going to just have actual YouTube integration soon. But yeah, so that seems like a broadly good thing, because people can like do watch parties and stuff now. So
yeah,
theoretically neat, although there's still questions about it. For example, is it going to run ads all the time? Because if you're doing like listening to music between a bunch of people and there are a bunch of ads interrupting, that sounds like an awful experience. So
yeah,
we'll see how that works out. My guess is that there will be ads because that's YouTube for you, but who knows?
yeah. I like that feature in general. There
Mhm.
is also a kind of crusty old part of me that is a bit disappointed that the kind of like homebrew option is gone. There was a lovely piece recently, I think it might have been a Kotaku piece, about
Mhm.
how like Discord has replaced forums,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like there is something very different about the culture of like constantly being on, constantly being in these chat rooms, that like forums were slightly removed from that.
Mhm.
Forums were a slower version of that, where you could be kind of more deliberative and long-winded in ways that I don't think Discord accommodates. And so, seeing the transition from forums to Discord, the Discord I'm most active in my
Mhm.
day-to-day life, used to be a forum.
Right.
Um, and then seeing this kind of like homebrew option that I had grown accustomed to in Groovy Bot vanish, seeing all of these changes, seeing like Google, the big G, the big tech company, starting to get involved in Discord. I wouldn't say it doesn't like really make me nervous, but there is a bit of disappointment there, because I do wish Discord could have stayed this kind of small-ish platform. um, I'll just end it there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wish to a certain extent it could have stayed small. Not even niche. I don't think Discord is niche. I don't think gaming is a niche really, but it's clear that it has these bigger, more mainstream ambitions,
Right.
and I don't know how that rolls out in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's inevitable that it becomes more mainstream just because it's such a popular chat platform. I think that what really pushed it over was like COVID.
Yeah.
Everybody needed a good way to hang out during COVID, and like Zoom has a lot of limits. People are like, oh, Discord, that's the one. And so, yeah, I think that Discord will likely change in time, just as Twitch has changed over time from being this kind of smaller, more intimate, not even less necessarily niche platform, but it was born of a niche and it carried that spirit. And yeah, I think Discord's on a similar trajectory for better or worse, probably some of both.
Yeah.
Speaking of Twitch, I just wanted to touch on this because nobody's really reported on it. I thought about reporting on it, but yeah. Um, but no, so, there's been tons of talk of Gabby Petito this week. And mainly it's been focused on how TikTok has been influencing that investigation, or at least it's been really involved in kind of like wanting to know the outcome, and in some cases spreading misinformation and things like that. And while not as pronounced, similar things did happen on Twitch this week. Uh, in that there are quite a few people who were following the Gabby Petito investigation and talking about it and dissecting it, in many cases with their chats live, which is always a little bit different from something like TikTok, where comments are not made in real time, meaning that the extent to which chat can construct theories and ideas is a little bit more hampered. Whereas on Twitch, people can just go one right after another. A streamer can say an idea, no matter how speculative, and then somebody in chat can just be like, "Yeah, I now believe this, and I'm going to even take it a step further and say this other thing." And yeah, so I think that it's interesting how there's all this interoperability between these platforms that we don't necessarily talk about, because while it would take an immense amount of work to trace, I can, with some degree of confidence say it's likely that somebody probably like came on Twitch, talked about things there in a Twitch chat, and then took that information to TikTok and then evolved that discussion further there. And it's like, at what point is it useful, or does it stop being useful for there to even be these sorts of like widespread discussions around in progress investigations where not everything is known, and the extent to which people online can dig things up is pretty limited? So I mean, like, people are going through Spotify playlists and stuff, and it's like, I'm sorry, friends, I know that feels productive, but that is almost certainly a dead end.
Yeah, there was this really great story in Wired recently about a family whose son had gone missing,
Mhm.
and for a while, like online detectives were trying to piece together where the kid could have gone, and the very likely unfortunate answer is that he probably drowned. There was
Yeah.
a river nearby that led out into a large bay, and the current was very strong. But the online detectives found a TikTok that the mom had made like weeks before, playing into a platform trend about like
Mm,
it had something to do with like killing, and they glommed onto that and got stuck on that, and that became its own narrative, and it ran in its own direction, and it ruined these people's lives.
yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned was the kind of interoperability between platforms. You see the benign version of that happening already,
Mhm,
where a Twitch streamer will take 5 hours of footage and condense it into 20 minutes for a VOD on YouTube. But
mhm,
if you can see a similar dynamic to that extend to kind of worse examples where you have a like conspiracy laden conversation, and
mhm,
people in chat are bringing up ideas, and this thing kind of snowballs, and then you move it to YouTube, and a lot of the context of, oh, this was a suggestion from chat, this came from somebody who knows who this person is, even beyond like the ludicrousness of the conversation to begin with, you
mhm.
lose a lot of the context for how a thing developed, for how a conversation happened when you move from platform to platform. So
Right.
there are a lot of kind of weird risks around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is why a lot of like the thing that is now QAnon began in live chats on like YouTube and places like that. Was because it's a really good ground for like forming theories and putting them together and propagating them very quickly in a way where, like, for one, like you're saying, a lot of context is lost when it goes beyond that area. And so, somebody could hear that theory and be like, oh, well, this is coming from somebody that I know and trust. So it must be very well researched and informed, when in reality, it was just some random offhand comment made by somebody in chat. And then the other thing about that makes it appealing is that when people are constructing these ideas together in chat, it feels like they get to own them. They feel ownership not just over the ideas that they have, but the entire topic. And so they become more interested and more invested in these things.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, that just leads to, man, it's why the internet in general is such a fertile breeding ground for conspiracies. And then like the other part of that too is that when you're dealing with other people and they're saying, yeah, that sounds right, or like, yeah, I think you're right, then you're like, oh, then I must be, or this must be correct because like
Mm.
X number of people are saying it is. And it's so easy to mistake that for research or for something that's well informed, when in reality it is just a large crowd of people being like, yes, but what if? However, have you considered? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's not a good way to generate information. You're just making stuff up,
Yeah.
talking in a big
There
circle.
there's ownership in acknowledgement, in you're watching a streamer and you say something and they acknowledge it or just say it in passing because they're reading
Mhm.
chat, and like that's the new thing you believe now because a
Right.
person you trust, a person you rely on, a person you turn to for comfort and content echoed it back to you. um, I am sure we will see that play out in all sorts of weird ways over the next decade, two
Oh yeah.
decades, for however long this experiment known as the internet keeps going.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, yeah. So obviously, this is a very valuable lesson, everyone in chat. But you should listen to the things that I say and
Mm.
act on those. Nobody else. Everybody else on the internet is just like, you should be very skeptical and suspicious and be like, oh, well, I just heard that from like some streamer or something. Me though, I know stuff. So just listen to me and me alone. Um,
Also me.
yeah. Mikhail, if you feel like it. I don't know. He's a bonus. Um, but anyway, some quick other things. I guess Quantic Dream is doing a Star Wars game. That's like a big rumor that's been circulating this week with a degree of credibility.
Hmm.
Quantic Dream made things like Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls and Detroit Become Human. They really like that cadence of game names.
Yeah.
Um, none of them are very good, but Quantic Dream keeps getting money. Quantic Dream has also been dinged for having like a very bad workplace.
Yeah.
In fact, they seem to have both won and lost their lawsuit against French media outlets because French media outlets wrote about those workplace allegations and abuses. And so, yeah, then they sued them and it was a whole thing. But yeah, both lawsuits were filed in 2018 over their coverage of allegations of sexism, homophobia, and inappropriate behavior at the studio. Um, Resulted in some really silly court proceedings. But in any
Yeah.
case, Quantic Dream is making a Star Wars game, I guess. So I'm sure it'll be cinematic and like in that way where Quantic Dream games are, where like on one hand, they're like very lavishly produced, but on the other hand, you don't have much direct control. and there's some sort of mid game or late game plot twist that's just like absolutely mind boggling.
I really dislike this, and I don't know how to describe this particularly well. This is a thought in progress, but the old Star Wars expanded universe felt very American in some way.
Mhm.
It was kind of extremely goofy looking. The designs were very of a time, of their time. Um, and now we see Fallen Order, which is like a very smooth looking game. I can only imagine a Quantic Dream Star Wars game would look similarly very smooth. I'm like imagining the faces of all the characters in Detroit Become Human that are
Mhm.
exceedingly like wet and smooth. And it is an aesthetic that it is very French in some way, in a way that
Mhm.
I can't really describe or pinpoint because it
I know
like
everybody in France has very wet and smooth
yeah,
faces.
exactly,
You
exactly.
go there, you're just like, can I touch your? No, that would be inappropriate. But is it wet, like physically?
But there is I like can't put my finger on it, but the split in design sensibility from kind of gross and nasty and sometimes unpleasantly American Star Wars expanded universe
Mhm.
to like smooth, sleek, wet, and French. I don't love it. I wish I had a better way to articulate this idea. I'm sure somebody vaguely understands what I'm gesturing at, but the
Smooth,
idea
sleek,
makes me
wet, and French
unhappy.
is my favorite sequel to Wet Hot American Summer.
That's right. That's right.
Um,
Oh.
but yeah, no. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll see this game at some point, and then we can render judgments then. Hopefully, it doesn't try to tackle racism by means of androids again, because that
Oh
didn't go so well
yeah.
last time.
Solo was what a
Oh
movie.
no, I mean Quantic Dream's last
Oh,
game.
oh,
I've not
oh,
seen
oh. I
Solo.
because I maybe that's why they chose Quantic Dream if they chose Quantic Dream because Solo had a very similar uh minor plot point where there was like a droid liberation activist named Leet, which I found yeah,
Mm.
1337
Oh God.
um Ooh, yeah, there was a whole sequence where a bunch of droids in a mine were saved from working in the mine, from being slaves in the mine.
Mhm.
Very Solo is a strange movie, but
Mm.
I can see how Star Wars found its partner. In theory, allegedly, supposedly, maybe.
In theory, allegedly, supposedly, maybe. Yeah. But yeah, let's see. Okay, so quick other things. I just really enjoy this headline. Who knows what the future holds for Titanfall? Say people who know what the future holds for Titanfall. So
Oh my god.
yeah, the basic crux being there's probably not going to be a Titanfall 3 for a very long time because
Yeah,
Apex Legends is incredibly successful, and I think Respawn probably wants to keep focusing on that.
that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, there was a really fascinating story in IGN recently about Titanfall and around some of the like save Titanfall stuff.
Oh
Um,
yeah, all the hacking and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, that ended on. I find that a lot of magazine journalism does this now, where it like touches on an interesting question, but then
Mhm.
ends
And
without
it's like, and
having
now it's
answered
over.
it. Yeah. Um, New York Magazine is like they do this so much and it makes me really mad where they're like
Mhm.
there's this crazy drama and this insane question surrounding this topic and then it reaches the end and they're like well I there was one piece recently that literally ended on the note of my editors told me I couldn't keep working on this story because I didn't have a clear lead, so after 3,000 words I guess the culprit of this thing could be this person but I don't know and I'm just going to let it rest. And
That seems massively irresponsible. But
it was so frustrating because it was a fascinating story. It was about,
mm,
uh, I guess, a fisher would probably be the best way to phrase it with a PH, who kept stealing copies of books before they were being published. They
mhm,
would reach out to agents involved in the publishing world and be like, "Hey, can you send me this copy?" Pretending to be somebody else,
mhm,
pretending to be a secretary or an associate or the author themselves, and would just get these early copies of highly anticipated books. And this whole mystery was who is the person doing this? and the story ends and they don't know. They didn't get to the bottom of it. Anyways, it's not super clear what's happening with Titanfall either. So
Yeah, well, no, here's what we need to do. So we get in touch with this person who's doing these phishing scams, and we get them to steal Titanfall 3 and then distribute it to the
Ooh.
world. Yeah, piece of
Now
cake.
you're talking.
Robin Hood.
Now you're talking.
Robin Hood for the modern era.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's see. So a thing that, and I apologize in advance that we're even going to do this one, but another thing that happened recently is that an Animal Crossing character has become a porn sensation. Yeah, why? Couldn't really tell you. Just has gotten real, like, enormously popular. Like, we're talking millions of views of a particular video, and like it spread on TikTok to the point where TikTok had to, like, they have rules against nudity and things like that, so they got rid of it. But even, yeah, like the tag for this has amassed over 17 million views. And yeah, just one of those weird internet occurrences. And
Listen,
oh yeah, it also comes from like a classic kind of like somebody who was really popular on like Newgrounds back in the day. Zone is their name. So it's kind of
Okay.
wild that they are resurfacing because they, I think, were well known online back in like mid and late 2000s. And now they've also done this. So anyway,
people's erotic awakening hits when it hits. Who am I to judge?
yeah, here we go. Another thing worth noting is if TikTok remixes are anything to go by, the catchy music Zone used helped Anka Zone achieve mainstream popularity. Oh, but there's likely a deeper cultural reason. Yeah, probably. Let's see. The English-speaking world's obsession with Egypt is not new. Historians have coined the term Egyptomania to describe the West's habit of exotifying Egypt. If Anka had been any other Animal Crossing villager, the video might not have inspired so many imitators on the internet. That's interesting.
I mean, Egypt occupies this kind of weird place in American culture, I think, because it is one of the few things from history we learn in any capacity whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like it is sort of weird in retrospect to think that American students, at least this was the case for me, at a pretty early age in the early grades, I think this must have been around like first grade for me, is taught about like Egyptian myths and Greek myths and some of the context, I guess, around like who the pharaohs were and et cetera, et cetera. But that is like a major history lesson
Yeah.
for American students in ways that, like, I don't know, like European countries or like Russian history is not ever really taught to American students, but
Yeah.
Egyptian myths are. And so I can see like the synapses firing, like the links between this old thing from when a person was in school as a child connecting to this trend happening now. Probably not worth interrogating any further though.
No. All right. So then a couple light things to close out. This is tragic to me. A streamer made an RPG in real life where chat controls him, but barely anyone watched, so he stared at a wall for an hour and then it ended.
Oh,
yeah,
that's so sad.
And I mean that's literally the VOD, staring at the wall. It's got a life bar there.
Was it so? There were several instances of this sort of thing happening recently. There was one Twitch streamer who was controllable, a la The Sims.
Oh, yeah, so that was Jerma. Yeah, Jerma did an amazing job with that, and is a very well creator, and so yeah, was able to put a lot of resources into that. So he had a whole crew. I mean, it was a massive production.
Yeah,
a crew, a set, multiple days, tons of guests, an overarching, existentially terrifying storyline. Like one of the more impressive live streaming productions that has ever been done, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think that there is an element. There's increasing popularity in the idea of people getting to control a streamer. I remember there was a New York Times article a little while ago where Taylor Lorenz wrote about kind of some of the ways the creator economy is evolving, and one of them was like actual, I think, third company is made for this exact thing, where like you get to spend some money, and then a content creator will, for a predetermined period of time, do what you told them to.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where, like, on one hand, you know, given the interfaces involved and everything, it makes a degree of sense. But on the other hand, it's like fairly dystopian on paper, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's literally like dance puppet for my entertainment. And you know, meanwhile, it's like how people are making money. So you know, it's a weird direction for things to go in. I think with like the Germo Sim stream, it was all innocent enough. But it's one of those things where I could see it, you know, on a more minute, less produced level, getting kind of out of hand or dark. But we'll see.
Yeah, I remember this isn't entirely analogous, but Ice Poseidon used
Oh
to
yeah.
stream himself
Yep.
in real life, and like the cops would constantly get called on him
Mhm.
by his viewers. Like people were just pulling all sorts of,
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
ranging from pranks to outright like things that could hurt people.
Yeah. Well, they were
Uh,
swatting him constantly. The
yeah,
reason he got banned from Twitch, or the straw that broke the camel's back, is that he got swatted while he was boarding a plane.
yeah,
And so like he was on the plane and the police came aboard, and at that point I think Twitch was like, okay, this is enough.
yeah.
We can't, this person's a liability.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of ways in which uh, streams in which there is, how to generalize this, chat control in some way
Mhm.
over a person's life or behavior. There are ways in which that can go really wrong, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's see, other things. Uh, so actually, it's already started, but there's a Nintendo Direct today, and I guess that they are announcing post-apocalyptic Kirby. So that's fun. I just wanted to bring this up because I
Mm,
find the entire image just it's a lot, right? Like you could just imagine around that corner over there, probably like, you know, Joel and Ellie from The Last of Us.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Uh,
just super good to me.
John had a really good video producer, John. That just, yeah, it looks like Kirby is in The Last of Us 2. It is an incredible image.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal. I'm very interested to learn how this plays. Maybe people are like watching the direct right now and have already found out. And then finally, the note that I want to end on is like, so on one hand, you know, like a cab or whatever, but on the other hand, this is a cop that I like. It's a hand cop. I think it has an official name. Let's see, what is the developer might have it in there. I know that the game has a name, but yeah, this is apparently how it's going to play is like you, on one hand, you are a hand that is also
Mm,
a cop, but on the other hand, like apparently the shooting is going to be like really realistic and detailed. And yeah, it's hand cop.
yeah,
How can you not like this thing?
it reminds me of, I wish I could remember what they were called, but the Spy Kids bad guys from the first Spy Kids. You know what I'm talking about? Floops, Fluglies.
I unfortunately have deleted enough of Spy Kids from my brain that I
Uh,
do not know.
they were just guys made of thumbs, where every appendage
Oh
was a big thumb.
man,
So this is vaguely reminiscent of that.
that's true. Maybe that'll be like that could be easily a villain in a game like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's all I got for everybody. And also, it seems like viewers have kind of gone their separate ways after what ended up being a pretty long stream. So I think that this is probably a good time to wrap things up.
Yeah.
So yeah, to everybody who came and watched, thank you for tuning in. I was, and hopefully will continue to be, unless I have like a dissociative episode, Nathan Grayson with the Washington Post, joined by Mikhail, who is also with the Washington Post.
I sure
And
am.
we will see you next time, 4 p.m. every Thursday. Actually, I won't because I'll be out of town, but someone will.